Well, come on in to Finish Strong. My name's Dan Wheeler. I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues, Terry Steen and Brian Rowland. And guys, I am as excited about our podcast tonight as I've been about any we've ever done before.
Oh, that's great. And I am too. It's the subject matter is one that you can't beat, can you?
Is there a higher subject matter?
It's one that everybody comments on whenever we do a program on it or a morning cup on it. We always get people commenting on it. So it's going to be fun.
And we're talking about heaven. And today we're going to talk about Imagine Heaven, a wonderful book that had so much impact and meant so much to me after Beth died. And you guys remember, after you left, you stayed with me through her Celebration of Life service. And I went out to Barnes & Noble and I found a book. It just jumped out at me from a table when I was really needing something. I was really down. And it was this book. And you remember me raving about it and telling you guys to run out and get it.
Ad nauseum.
Well, you're about to find out why. It just was such a peace and a comfort to me knowing where Beth was. And I got excited about heaven. And you're going to get excited about it too as you watch this podcast. Don't miss a minute of it, because today the author of that book joins us. We're thrilled to welcome John Burke, who was the founder and former lead pastor of Gateway Church in Austin, Texas. He's an international speaker. He's authored several books, including the New York Times best-selling Imagine Heaven. And John, welcome to Finish Strong. So great to have you.
Good to have you.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. I don't just tell people this is the best book I've ever read on heaven, and it is, but it's one of the best books I've ever read, period. It reads like a novel in the beginning when George Ritchie's story is being told, and it just draws you in. So congratulations. It's a great book.
Well, it told itself. I kind of feel like I'm more like a reporter than a writer, of taking all these amazing accounts and weaving them together.
Yeah, well, the accounts are called NDEs, which stand for near-death experiences. And is it true that before you were a pastor, you were, in your own words, an analytical and skeptical engineer? And while your father was dying of cancer, you started reading about these near-death experiences?
Yeah, I was an agnostic. I didn't know if there was a God. I thought Jesus was probably just a human turned legend, not the Son of God. And someone gave my dad the very first research that coined the term near-death experience. And I saw it on his dresser, picked it up, couldn't put it down, read it in one night. And I said, oh my gosh, this might be the evidence I've been looking for.
Wow.
Because I wasn't closed. I just needed to know why this wasn't just make believe.
Yeah.
Right.
And so these near-death experiences, you're talking about when someone clinically dies, their heart stops beating, they have no brain waves, and yet they're coming back saying, I was more alive than I've ever felt before, in a place more real than this has ever felt. And many times in the presence of this God of light and love who personal, knows them intimately, and in whose presence they never want to leave. And so that opened my mind. And then not long after that, I started, I got invited into a small group Bible study. One of my friends became a Christian and invited me to a small group Bible study. And I would have said, nah, except that it was like, well, maybe. And so I then became a follower of Jesus after that, and eventually I went from a career in engineering into ministry. And 26 years ago, my wife and I started a church for skeptical doubters like myself, and it turns out there are a lot of them in Austin.
Yeah, because that church thrived, didn't it? It's vibrant. Gateway Church. Wow.
Yeah, we saw about 5,000 people come to faith in Jesus from every religious background, every walk of life, it was amazing. It really was. It was a very, it was a wonderful experience to lead that church.
It's amazing how God uses our story, isn't it? We've done a podcast on that. Your most powerful weapon is your testimony and your story. And that just, and so these stories, this may be the hardest question we ask you, John. This is one you've written all these fantastic stories in this book. Is there one that intrigued you or impacted you the most that rises to the top?
Oh,
Tough question.
well, it is hard because I mean, there's so many different ones for different reasons, but I will say in Imagine Heaven, probably Vicky's story, and for several reasons, because, Vicky pulls together a lot of what convinced me. So, what convinced me when, because I started down the path of faith, I still had a lot of questions about these near-death experiences. It really did take me 35 years and studying 1,000 of them before I was ready to write a book about it.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but Vicky was blind from birth. So she had never seen anything, and she had no visual perception. No, people blind from birth don't imagine something visual at all.
Yeah.
And yet at age 22, she was in a car accident. She finds herself up above it and trying to adjust to this new thing called sight. And that's common. So I've interviewed about 6 blind people, and they can always see, and they see and report the same things as sighted near-death experiencers.
Wow.
And that's a powerful strand of evidence.
Sure is.
Now, the other thing is Vicky, she ended up following them to the hospital in the ER room. She's up above her body and it's chaos, but she notes the ring. She doesn't even know what's going on. And she's like, am I dead? And then she notices the ring on the body of this person they're working on and long hair. And she puts it together that, well, I have long hair and the ring has, her wedding ring had an orange blossom on it. And she saw that.
Wow.
And one of the other things that really convinced me of near-death experiences being grounded in our reality is how many people, when they come back, can describe things that they saw happening in the emergency room during their resuscitation that turn out in studies to be 92% accurate, completely accurate. And so Vicky was a believer in Jesus, and it was chaos in the room, and she feels great. She feels wonderful. And in fact, that's one of the commonalities is that they say, many times people don't realize they're dead because they just feel themselves, but they feel wonderful, like not just 5 senses, more like 50 senses.
Wow.
And blended senses. And so she feels this incredible peace. She feels wonderful. She's like, I know where I'm going. I'm out of here. And she takes off. Now, what's interesting is sometimes people go through a tunnel. They say a tunnel opens up, but sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just out through our atmosphere and beyond. So Vicky started up through the hospital. She looks out, she can see kind of the cityscape and all that. Never seen it before. So she's fascinated. And then for her, a tunnel did open up. And it's interesting because she said, she was trying to describe colors and she didn't have words for it. She said, I don't know how to describe it, like many different brightnesses. That's the way she described colors. And then she said she enters this tunnel and there was no color, it was dark. But the way she described it is no color. And she goes through it and she comes out into this beautiful garden-like place of, there are grass and trees and flowers and birds singing and this beautiful group, and this group of people coming toward her. And what she said is that everything, it was like light was coming out of everything, but the light was not like light on earth. She said it felt like love and like life and light and it was like palpable, and it was coming out of the grass and coming out of the trees and coming out of the birds and even coming out of the people that were coming toward her, who she recognized. Diane and Debbie, who died at age 9 and 7, they grew up with her in a home for the blind, and she recognized her grandmother and a larger group of people coming toward her. Now, one of the reasons this is so fascinating, if I can just pause for a second, is all of the biblical connections. Mm-hmm. So here, commonly, near-death experiencers say that light is coming out of everything. But a blind person would have never heard that on earth, that light shines out of things in heaven.
Yeah.
And yet in Isaiah chapter 60, the Jewish prophet Isaiah says, there is no sun or moon in heaven, for the glory of God is its light.
The light, yes.
Yeah. And then in Revelation 21, John, one of Jesus' disciples, said he was taken up into heaven, and he says, there is no sun or moon. God is its light, and the Lamb, Jesus, is its lamp, and the nations will walk in that light.
Wow.
And this is what they're describing. Now, also the light coming out of people. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13, and then the righteous will shine like the sun in their Father's kingdom forever.
Yeah.
And so, and we don't always, it's that, and that's what's fascinating. We don't always, sometimes Marv Besteman was a bank president I interviewed. He said, I was just wearing my normal like golf outfit that I wore every Saturday.
Right.
And so sometimes, but sometimes they're just bursting with this light. So then Vicky, she sees her two friends who she said they weren't 9 and 7, they were in their prime. Mm-hmm. And that's another commonality, that people are typically about 30.
And her story was corroborated by their house mother that raised all 3 of them, correct?
Exactly.
You have so much proof and corroboration in this book. It's
because she saw, she turns and sees a light brighter than any, and she sees Jesus, and she runs to him, and he is a man of light, just brighter than the sun, but she recognizes him, and she runs to him, and he hugs her, and she can feel his beard on her face. But she said light was coming out of the beard. And he says to her, you'll love it here. Everything fits together. And she then gets a life review, which is another commonality. And in this life review, just like you were saying, she sees herself interacting with Diane and Debbie, these two friends. And she was able, when she came back, to describe some of the disabilities they had, how they walked, what they looked like, and she didn't know those things, and those things checked out with the house mother.
Amazing.
And so, and it goes on, but basically Jesus sent her back. He said, you need to go back, and you're going to teach people a lot about how to love.
Amazing. Well, you took one of the people that you have experiences with that you shared was a doctor, you said, and you also had professors and bank presidents in there too. And the people that you have, they don't necessarily gaining anything financially from it. And most of them can risk hurting their reputations of people finding out their experiences. Is there a certain reason why you chose these stories? Or their stories?
Well, yes. In Imagine Heaven, and somewhat in my new book, Imagine the God of Heaven, I leaned toward people who did have something to lose. So one, I wanted to focus on those who had clinically died. So there was some sense of evidence they had clinically died, and their spine surgeons, their CEOs, their bank presidents, their commercial airline pilots, and just like you said, because a lot of them, they are very hesitant to talk about, I went to heaven and I met Jesus, and this one CEO, before he started talking about his story, he said, "I'm going to lose my career."
Wow!
Because he was in biotech.
Wow!
But he realized, this is why God sent me back, so I've got to do it.
That's neat.
Amazing.
The name of the book is Imagine Heaven. You don't want to miss it. You can go to imagineheaven.net to find out more information about John and his books. in our next podcast, we're going to talk about his latest book, Imagine the God of Heaven. But can you share the story of Maria and the blue tennis shoe? Because when I read it, my jaw just hit the floor. It's amazing.
Yeah, and this is one of the many, like I said, that are verifiable observations that people make when they're out of their body. And so
when they're clinically dead.
When they're clinically dead.
Yeah.
So Maria is in a hospital, I believe it was in Seattle, and she passes. She leaves her body. She's initially in the room, seeing what's going on, able to report on it. But then she travels, and she's like traveling. It's like, kind of like floating, I guess. And she goes up through the hospital, and she ends up like on the third story, and she notices because she was for a while outside of the hospital, she notices a blue tennis shoe on the ledge outside, like someone had thrown it up there or something. I don't know how it got up there. And it was a blue tennis shoe with a wear mark on the left toe, and the laces were tucked under the shoe. And when she's resuscitated, she's trying to describe this incredible experience. And as usually does happen, or used to anyway, medical personnel just, it was drugs, or it was, psychosis or something. But she said, look, I can prove it to you. Go up and to the third floor. And I saw this shoe out on the ledge, and this one medical professional who turned out to be, she started researching them, went up and found that shoe on the ledge outside, exactly with the lace tucked under. And you guys, there are so many like this, and they've been reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association. I tell another one in the Lancet, Europe's most prestigious medical journal, had another one like that. So there are many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, all these stories. There was another one that you told about Dr. Richard Eby. Would that be right, or Eby?
Yeah.
He fell onto cement head first, and he died on impact. And in his experience in heaven, he had a body, but it was different than the one he has here. Yeah,
he said, and sometimes, it's interesting because sometimes I think we can appear on the other side in different ways. And I don't know exactly how to explain that, except that I know sometimes people appear to each other in the age or the form that they saw him when, like your grandfather, and he looks like your grandfather at grandfather age, but clearly also much younger. But typically people appear younger. And I think there is something about this spiritual body that must allow that. So Dr. Eby says he sees his body, and he sees, arms and legs and all that, but he can also see through it.
Wow.
And he can see the flowers like underneath, through his body.
It's like translucent or transparent, I guess.
Yeah, except it's not always that way. Because people see each other and they're not just translucent or transparent. People describe each other like they normally would.
Wow.
And so that's why I say that I think, and look, Jesus, when he was resurrected, now he had version, this body is version 1.0. Right. Our intermediate state body, like the near-death experiencers, is version 2.0. That's our spiritual body. Paul talks about that, right? In 1 Corinthians 15, he said, our bodies are buried a natural body, but they're raised a spiritual body. And he says they're buried in weakness, but they're raised in power.
Yeah.
And these powers of sight and of communication and, all these extra senses is what near-death experiencers say. But the body of Jesus was version 3.0 because his spiritual body was reunited to his resurrected physical body. Now, the thing is, Jesus appeared to some of the disciples on the Emmaus Road, and they didn't recognize him until they broke the bread, and then somehow he made himself recognizable.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
He also was not confined by our walls and space. He came into a room
Right.
and left that room, but he could also be touched. Thomas stuck his finger in the nail hole
Yeah.
and he ate fish with them.
Right.
Yeah.
But he could also float up into the clouds as they were watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of the things that near-death experiencers describe, is what the people who were eyewitnesses of the resurrection also describe.
And I think of the transfiguration when Jesus had Peter, James, and John. He changed and glowed and light. So many things confirmed. Now, you have stories of children who've had NDEs. And there was a child, I believe he was 5 years old, and he died and experienced the love and all the wonders. And when he came back, he shocked his parents because he told them he'd met a sister that
that's
he'd
Colton.
never met.
Yeah, Colton, he was 4. And it's fascinating. And these are several other evidential points. Colton was 4. His dad was a pastor. He dies in the hospital, and his father goes off to a closet that he finds, and he's having a yelling match with God. Like, I served you, and how in the world can you take my son?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Colton says, when he came back, all this came out, is that he was there with 2 angels, and he was sitting on Jesus' lap, and Jesus said to him, and he was there for a while, and time works differently on the other side. It's just like Peter says in 1 Peter 3:8, to the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day.
Yeah.
And that's what they say. And he was there with Jesus for a while. And Jesus at one point said to him, we need to pray for your father because he's struggling right now. He needs you to pray for him. And Colton saw him yelling at God in that closet. And that's what got the father's attention when he told him, when he came back, that, he was with Jesus, and he said he wasn't sure whether to believe it, right? And he said, yeah, Jesus told me to pray for you when you were in that closet. And he was like, nobody knew I was in there.
Right.
And how did you know it? And then he later also said, Daddy, Jesus had markers. And he said, you mean markers like that you color with? He's a 4-year-old. And he said, yeah, markers. And he said, well, where were the markers? And he said, right here and right here.
Oh.
Wow.
So all he could describe is, the holes in Jesus, which many near-death experiencers have confirmed. He keeps that because it's a sign of his greatest love.
Wow.
It's the marks of his love. So little Colton, says that. And then at another time he said, I met my sister in heaven, and she told me to tell you that she can't wait to see you. And they said, you don't have a sister. You mean your cousin? And he kept saying, no, my sister. And then all of a sudden they realized they had a miscarriage.
Wow.
But they had never told Colton that.
Yeah.
And they didn't know if it was a boy or a girl.
Wow. Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And those are common. That's the thing. See, what many people don't realize, and that's what I'm trying to show in these books, is that millions of people have had these experiences. I personally studied probably 1,500 of them. But what's amazing is the commonalities of what they report perfectly overlaps with the expectation the Bible has of the life to come, and with the attributes of God. That's what people experience.
Well, John, they can't all be great Christians that go to heaven who have a near-death experience, right? Have you talked to anybody who was going to hell or was not going to heaven? Any interesting stories there?
Yes, many actually.
Okay.
About 23% in one study, about 23% of people who came forward reporting a near-death experience reported a hellish one. So in Imagine Heaven, I spend a whole chapter on that because it's important to understand the reality of hell, and that God does not want anybody to go there. And what he did for all people through Jesus was make a way that a simple turning of the heart back to God, asking for forgiveness and wanting relationship, that's all it takes. And what's interesting now, one thing I noticed, there was a commonality, is that in these near-death experiences, people come to a border or a boundary they knew they couldn't cross and still come back to earth. And so what I've realized is these near-death experiences are not fully crossing over into either eternal life or eternal death, but it is showing the reality of all of that.
Right.
So it's like a peek. It's like if I went and visited Buckingham Palace, I could see the place, but it doesn't mean the royal family's ready to adopt me and have me move in permanently.
Yeah.
And so it's more like that. So Howard Storm is a real powerful one. He's become a good friend, but he was an atheist, tenured college professor who was doing a tour in France when his lower duodenum ruptured. You have usually about 5 to 6 hours before all the junk eats through all your organs. And it was Saturday in France. They couldn't find a surgeon. After 8 hours, he died. And suddenly, he was in the worst pain he ever imagined. And then suddenly, he's standing there by the bed, and he feels wonderful. And he doesn't know he's dead, because he thought when you die, it's just, unplug the computer and the blank screen, nothing.
Yeah.
And so he feels all these heightened senses, and he's an artist, so he's intrigued by it. And then he hears these nice people in the hallway, his welcoming committee, who were there, saying, "Howard, we're here for you. Come with us." And he said, I've been waiting. I need surgery. "Oh, yes, we know all about you. Come. Don't you want to? Come on. We've been waiting. We want to help you. Come on." And I like to point out that if Howard had been resuscitated right then, he would have said, "Atheists go to heaven. It's all good. Everything's good." And some do. And I think that's a very important, some do. They have a very shallow experience, and they can interpret it a million different ways.
Yeah.
But he followed this group of people, and he could never quite see them clearly. But as he followed them, and again, time and distance doesn't work the same on the other side. Long story short, after a while, he realizes the hospital can't be this big, and it was getting darker and darker. And he starts to realize, I don't know that they're good. And he starts to push back, and then they start to shove and push and kick, and he ends up in this outer darkness, just like Jesus described, the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. And these people, he ends up in what he called blacker than black darkness. And they turn on him as he starts to fight and try to get away. They turn on him and just start to maul him, but they're really playing with him. They're eviscerating him. They're tearing him apart. And they're doing things to him. I was with Howard just a month ago, and I've talked to him about it several times. And I've asked him, because he always comes to a point where he says, I can't talk about it anymore. And the reason is because it's realer than real. And he has PTSD from it. And he said, they did the most horrific things to me you can imagine. Just imagine the worst prison scene times 1,000.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And so in that, though, here's the amazing thing. In that, he hears a voice in his solar plex saying, "Pray to God. Pray to God." And he thinks to himself, I don't believe in God. I'm an atheist. Why would I pray to God? And so here's the amazing thing. He is literally in this hellish experience being torn apart, and yet his ego, his pride, has imprisoned him so much he can't even consider it at first.
Wow.
But it keeps happening. And finally, he doesn't even know how to pray, but he just starts piecing together things like country 'tis of thee, God bless America, God, anything you could remember with
Had
God.
to do with God, yeah.
And they started cursing him even more and saying there is no God, and now we're really going to hurt you. But they were backing off.
Yeah. Oh, John, I just noticed the time, and we've got about 4 or 5 questions some of our viewers are interested in. So we're going to move just a little faster, okay? Maybe.
Well, let me wrap it up. He cries out to Jesus, and into this darkness comes this light brighter than the sun, and arms reach out and take him out of there. He gets a life review, and Jesus sends him back. And 2 years later, he leaves his tenured college professorship to become a Christian pastor.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Wow. I'm glad you, man. I mean, we could do 3 hours with you, 4 hours. There's so
I just
much.
did 6 hours on a podcast.
Did you? Oh my goodness. Well, we can go a little longer. That's for sure. But now here's some things on everyone's mind. Have there been reports of music in heaven? And if so, what was it like?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me. I have not talked about that yet. It's amazing. So the music of heaven, you know, one guy, Don Piper, described it to me. He said, and others have said similar things. He said, imagine hearing every genre of song from Bach, Beethoven, to Queen, or, you know, U2 or some, all at the same time, perfectly harmonized. And sometimes they say, and in different languages, but you understand it all.
Wow.
It's music of another dimensionality, of another complexity. But what they also say is that there's something in us, like the music is coordinating everything of heaven. And it's almost like every fiber of our being is tuned to it. And so we participate in it. And it's kind of like it's going all the time. And
wow.
Yeah. And George Ritchie, Jesus took him to this place, this building where they were composing music, he said, that was just a different order of magnitude of complexity that, you know, of things he had never heard before. Wow. So yeah, we create on the other side. We create music. We create, we build, we will oversee things and people. And, you know, Jesus said that some of you will rule nations.
Yeah. I've always thought music was proof there's a God, because where does it come from? It's just amazing harmonies. And that's great. Brian, you've got a question, I know.
Yeah. I want to ask you, well, how about pets? I always get that from people. Are there going to be pets in heaven? I got my own ideas, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. In fact, in the new book, in Imagine the God of Heaven, Karina Martinez from Colombia, she's there before the light of God, and he's saying, come, you're home. And she feels like she doesn't deserve it. She knew she was going to hell, and she cried out for forgiveness at the last minute, and she didn't deserve it. And she said, if it's safe, then show me someone that died before me in my family. And Jesus says, look to your right. And she looks down, and there's her little dog that died the week before.
Oh, wow.
And she goes in. And another, the CEO I interviewed, also his little puppy that he grew up with that was really his best friend growing up. He's there with Jesus, and he sees coming across the meadow, and little Casey jumps up on him and licks him like a lollipop, just like he did when he was a kid.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Which you would think, you know, it's almost like, no, it's just too good to be true. But I think that's the problem, is we don't realize how good God is.
Right.
And we don't realize that every good thing in this life is his gift. And this is a marred creation. It's messed up.
Right.
So he's going to make it right. And it's going to be better than you can imagine.
So there will be children. You mentioned something about 30 years was kind of the age that people's bodies appeared to be in heaven if they were older. Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah. And in some cases, you know, it's funny because I remember one guy said he saw his grandmother and grandfather, but they looked older, like the last time he had seen them. But he said, but at the same time, and he was an older man when he died. And he said, but I felt like a teenager again. And I looked at them and I thought, I mean, they could run and do a flying catch for a football right now if they wanted to.
Oh.
I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
Me
year,
too.
More and more.
Get our old athletic bodies back. Well, you answered one of my questions. Is heaven going to be boring? People think on a cloud playing a harp. Not boring at all.
I know. I like to. People always say it's going to be an endless worship service, and I always say I'm a pastor. That sounds bad to me.
Yeah.
Like Dan, you mentioned harps. Are there going to be? Did people say they saw angels?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh,
how
yeah.
How did they describe them?
And what's fascinating to me is how they commonly describe them, either as like 10 feet, 12 feet, or 15 feet tall.
Yeah. Oh,
big.
Not all of them, but many are, and they're different. They have different roles. There are guardians, there are scribes, there are warriors, and yeah. So
wow. John, I wrote a book about my late wife called Hurricane of Love. And Brian, you were there the night a friend of mine who's not a Christian saw what he described as an angel. And he was about that height. Oh, wow. He said he was right over me and just the light. He said I couldn't even look at it. And he said he had to be 8 to 10 feet tall. And I asked him, he said, I looked away. And as you talked, he appeared again. And this being, I said, what do you think it was, John? He goes, I'm not a religious guy. I think it was an angel. And I said, I'm pretty sure it was.
Wow.
And Dan, he was probably only 6 foot tall.
Okay, Terry. Yeah.
Because of how short you are.
Yeah. I'm 5'8", and Terry says I'm 5'4". Yeah. We do like to laugh, so we're glad there'll be laughter in heaven, right? Because, we'll talk about that. Your next book, you talked about laughter and the joy. John, the time has just flown by, and I knew it would, but we're going to have you back for our next episode of Finish Strong and talk about your new book, Imagine the God of Heaven. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, John.
It's been great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. We'll wrap it up. Guys, we always talk about how does the podcast that we heard apply to finishing strong. And C.S. Lewis said, if you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were those who thought the most about the next. Aim at heaven, and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at heaven, you'll get earth thrown in. Aim at earth, and you will get neither. Isn't that a great?
Yeah, that's a great line.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts
this
about?
Answered so many questions that they're question marks, and when you hear the uniqueness of all these different situations, how do you dispel it? How can you not believe some of those stories?
Really?
It was one thing to read the book, but to hear it from John, I mean, wow, the story just really came to life. I mean, they did in the book, but they just came to life, and the little things like the light coming through the beard, and like that's like, oh my gosh. And Dan, what it reminds me of is when he talked about the guys were telling him to come with us. Remember when Beth was looking up and she was waving, and we said, what are you waving at? And she goes, don't you see the people? They're saying, come on. And they're waving at her. And
she kept staring at a corner of the ceiling. And finally I asked her, I said, Beth, what do you see? And she said, heaven. And I said, it was beautiful. And she looked at me and said, oh, yes. She was having trouble talking, but I don't even think she would have been able to describe it. So I know it's real. We know it's real. If you don't know it's real, you can know, and you can know that you're going there by accepting the Lord into your heart. And go on John Burke's website. I want to get it right, and I wrote it down. It's imagineheaven.net. Right. So many resources. Terry, would you close us with prayer for those that don't know they're going to heaven and they aren't even sure if it's real?
Yeah. Father, we thank you for this time and the revelation of the knowledge that heaven is so incredible that you've prepared for us, Lord. And I just pray for anyone listening today that just in the back of their mind has no idea where they're going. They hope, but they don't know. And we know, Lord, that you've allowed a path and a plan that they can know beyond a shadow of a doubt. And we just ask, Lord, that they would say that prayer that says, you are their Savior. You died for their sins. We're all sinners. You died to forgive them of those sins. And then all that you ask is that they accept it and believe it and make you Lord of their life. And I pray that anyone listening right now would make that prayer real to them. And when that happens, it's amazing how in your spirit and in your mind, you can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that heaven is where you're going when you die. So we thank you for that, Father. We thank you for this time and this podcast. What an incredible time. And we love you and praise you in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys, and thank you for joining us. Don't miss our next episode. John Burke will return to discuss his latest book, Imagine the God of Heaven. That's the next edition of Finish Strong. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Finish Strong. For more information about Finish Strong and Fearless Faith, check out their website, ffaith.org. Make sure that you rate and review this podcast to help more people accomplish their God-given purpose so that together we can finish strong.